Her husband died suddenly. Her eyes stayed dry. Poirot knew grief wasn't the only thing missing. Welcome to Poirot Puzzles. I am your host, Craydon. I'm curious, where are you tuning in from as we uncover the truth? Your comments add so much to these stories. Let's begin. In the velvet-lined drawing room of the Hargrave estate, the ticking of a long case clock was the only sound daring to disturb the silence. It was just past 10 on a crisp October morning when the butler, solemn-faced and visibly shaken, stepped into the study and found Sir Miles Hargrave slumped over his desk, head tilted at an unnatural angle, mouth slightly ajar, and one hand frozen over a half-written letter addressed to his solicitor. The ink had pooled, staining the paper like a spreading bruise. Lady Eveline Hargrave stood quietly behind the constable as he examined the body. Her posture was composed, her face unnaturally serene. Not a single tear marred her powdered cheeks. No trembling lip, no shaking hands. She had called the authorities herself with impeccable calmness and had already changed into a darker ensemble by the time the first officer arrived. Sir Miles, a retired diplomat known for his polarizing temperament and meticulous record-keeping, had only returned from Morocco 3 months prior, following an abrupt end to his post. Those who knew him, servants, family, and acquaintances alike, often described him as brilliant but impossible, generous yet controlling, and a man who always suspected betrayal. His estate, a sprawling manor just outside the town of Waverton-on-Thames, was both opulent and paranoid, equipped with heavy locks, French security glass, and an inner office only accessible with a brass key he always wore on a chain around his neck. The death appeared, at first glance, natural. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no screams heard in the night, yet something felt off. The family physician, Dr. Renfrew, refused to sign the death certificate, citing ambiguity. Something about the man's expression, he said, and a faint chemical odor. The local police, unfamiliar with anything more complex than petty theft or livestock disputes, hesitated. And so, before any assumptions could harden into official statements, Superintendent Barrington discreetly telephoned a certain Belgian detective residing comfortably in London. "Poirot, if you can spare a day, this may warrant your attention. A prominent man is dead, and his widow does not seem very widowed." Poirot, ever attuned to irregularities in human behavior, accepted at once. By the time he arrived at Hargrave Manor the following day, the house had adopted that eerie stillness particular to places touched by sudden death. The staff moved slowly and spoke little. The family solicitor had arrived to begin inventorying documents and sealing drawers, and Lady Eveline, the beautiful, much younger second wife of Sir Miles, was already taking appointments with the estate planner. As Poirot stepped out of the taxi, a chill breeze lifted the edge of his coat, but he smoothed it back into place with clinical precision. He removed his gloves delicately, surveying the building with a practiced eye. Ivy curled up the stone walls. All windows were shut, curtains drawn tight. Orderly. Yes, but perhaps too orderly. He was met at the entrance by a pale young man with fidgeting fingers. "Victor Cray, Sir Miles's nephew. I'm handling affairs now that he's gone. Eveline is inside. She'll speak with you." He gave a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Though I warn you, she hasn't wept. Not once." "People talk." Poirot tilted his head. "People always talk, monsieur. The question is what they fail to say." Inside, the drawing room felt preserved rather than lived in. Lady Eveline Hargrave stood by the fireplace, watching the flames without really seeing them. Her posture was impeccable, as if posing for an oil painting. She turned slowly when Poirot entered, offered a hand that was cool and dry, and greeted him with a composed smile. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. I assume they told you everything." He inclined his head. "They told me what little there is to know, madame. I prefer to begin with what is felt, not only what is said." She arched a brow, the corner of her mouth lifting faintly. That sounds like something Miles would mock. He was a man of facts, not feelings. "And yet feelings often betray the facts," said Poirot softly. Lady Eveline did not flinch. She gestured for him to sit, and with quiet grace poured tea. No tremble in her hands, no catch in her voice. "I suppose they think I poisoned him," she said suddenly. "That's what people think when the young wife outlives the old husband and doesn't collapse into grief." Poirot studied her over the rim of his cup. "What I think, madame, is that you are not surprised, and surprise, unlike grief, is nearly impossible to suppress." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I stopped being surprised by Miles years ago." He let the silence stretch, forcing her to fill it. He kept secrets. Paranoia was his greatest love. He was convinced someone wanted to rob him, betray him, expose him. He locked everything, watched everyone. I half expected he'd outlive us all, simply out of suspicion. Poirot glanced at the mantelpiece. 2 clocks sat there, identical in design, one 2 minutes ahead of the other. Odd. His gaze lingered, but he said nothing. When the interview ended, Poirot requested a tour of the house. Victor Cray volunteered, pointing out small anomalies Poirot stored away with care: the broken window latch in the study, the half-burnt letter in the grate, the key missing from the chain Sir Miles wore. "Lady Eveline said it was there the night before," Victor offered, "but it wasn't found on the body." Poirot nodded, eyes narrowing. "And you, monsieur, where were you that evening?" "Playing billiards with Hargrave's godson, Jeremy Atherton. We were here. Doors locked. Staff can confirm." "Ah, the alibis will arrive like clockwork," murmured Poirot. As he left the study, he paused beside the long case clock. He tapped its polished wood and whispered under his breath, "The widow never cried." But the house itself, perhaps it mourns. And with that, Hercule Poirot began. The next morning, as a light drizzle softened the edges of the Hargrave estate's pristine lawns, Poirot requested that all individuals connected to the deceased be gathered in the drawing-room. Lady Eveline, impassive as ever, agreed without protest. Word spread swiftly, and by 10 o'clock, a cluster of uneasy figures had assembled before the fireplace, each wearing a different shade of discomfort. Some held cups of untouched tea. Others stood stiffly by the windows, pretending to observe the rain. Poirot stood by the hearth, hands gently clasped behind his back, head slightly bowed as if in contemplation. When he spoke, his voice was calm and deliberate. "Mes amis, thank you for indulging me. Before the authorities make conclusions based on circumstance and conjecture, I would prefer to speak with each of you, discreetly, yes. But first, I must know who stands before me. You will forgive my precision. Let us begin." The first to step forward was Victor Cray, the nephew. Mid-30s, neatly dressed in an understated wool suit, and with eyes that flickered toward the door more than once. "I'm Victor. Miles raised me after my parents died. I handle the Hargrave Trust. Have done for years. We didn't always get along, but he trusted me. Mostly." "Ah," said Poirot, "trust. A curious word when spoken in the past tense, n'est-ce pas?" Victor did not reply. He stepped back, jaw set. Next was Jeremy Atherton, the godson, a charming man in his late 20s with a disarming smile and tailored confidence. He was a theatrical agent in London, his manner practiced yet genuinely affable. "Uncle Miles always found me frivolous," he said with a self-deprecating shrug. "But he indulged me nonetheless. I spent most weekends here, mostly for billiards and brandy. I'm as shocked as anyone." Poirot tilted his head. "You were here the night before?" "With Victor, until well after midnight." "Mercy." Then came Miss Helena Fosbury, Sir Miles's personal secretary. a woman in her 50s, bespectacled, tightly wound, with ink-stained fingertips and a tightly coiled bun. I managed Sir Miles's correspondence and accounts. He trusted very few people with his papers. I was one Poirot noted the subtle quiver in her tone, a strain behind the clipped precision of her words. She kept glancing at Lady Evelyn. "Did you type the letter he was writing when he died?" Number that would have been in his own hand. Most of the letters he sent to his solicitor he composed personally. Très bien. Next entered Doctor. Renfrew, the local physician, stoop-shouldered and grave-faced, with the manner of a man more comfortable with facts than feelings. "I was called after the butler found him," he said. "The scene looked undisturbed, but there was a faint scent, a chemical presence. Not enough for certainty, but enough to stop me from signing the certificate." Poirot nodded slowly. "And was Sir Miles in poor health, monsieur?" "Hypertension, stress. He took a daily tonic, but nothing immediately fatal." "Was this tonic in his study?" "I believe so." "Merci, docteur." Then, perhaps the most reluctant of all, was the housekeeper, Mrs. Fallon. Late 60s, folded into herself like a weary sparrow, yet with eyes that had clearly seen too much. "I've been with the Hargraves for 30 years, she murmured. "Sir Miles was difficult, but he paid well. He and Lady Evelyn, they didn't share much anymore. Separate rooms, separate everything." Poirot raised a brow. "And yet no talk of divorce?" Number Sir Miles believed in keeping things presentable. "Even if broken," Poirot added. Mrs. Fallon lowered her eyes. At last, Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn, who had not moved from her chair by the fire. "And you, madame? You are not just the widow, but also the only one present in the house when Sir Miles was last seen alive. That gives you a unique perspective." She did not blink. "You mean suspicion?" "I mean proximity, madame, nothing more. I was in my suite, he was in his study. That was how we lived." "And loved?" She smiled faintly. I think that word no longer applied. Poirot allowed the silence to grow again, filling the room like fog. When he spoke next, his tone had sharpened slightly. "You will all forgive me if I am, how do you say, particular. I intend to inspect the study once more, to examine the contents of Sir Miles's desk, his tonic, and his papers. I may ask each of you to speak with me individually thereafter." No one objected, but eyes were exchanged, and in the hush that followed Poirot's departure, the group seemed to exhale in nervous unison, as if the presence of the little Belgian detective had forced them to hold their breath. Poirot returned to the study and instructed the constable to assist him in cataloguing every item on and within the desk. The letter on the blotter, addressed to the solicitor, mentioned a matter of immediate concern regarding the estate structure, and hinted that certain parties must be removed from the will before it's too late. The letter ended abruptly with a jagged pen stroke. There was no envelope, no key to the study was found, only the broken chain, still around the deceased's neck. The tonic, in a glass decanter with a silver label reading M, evening dose, was nearly empty. Poirot held it up and sniffed, brow creasing. There was a faint almond note beneath the herbal odor. He made a note to request a chemical analysis. He moved to the fireplace, where ash from a recently burned document lingered. Using tweezers, Poirot extracted a charred fragment. On it, a barely legible phrase. "Revisit clause. Primary Ben." "Primary beneficiary," Poirot whispered. "Mais bien sûr." Suddenly, Poirot paused. There, tucked behind a leather-bound ledger on the second shelf, was a small framed photograph. Not of Lady Evelyn, not of Victor or the godson, but of a child, a boy, no more than 5, smiling up at the camera with unmistakable mischief in his eyes. Poirot turned the frame. On the back, in spidery ink, "Leo, my truest legacy." Poirot's brows knit together. And who, mon petit garçon, are you? As he returned the frame to its place, he heard a voice behind him. Curious, isn't it? It was Miss Fosbury. Sir Miles never spoke of him, never mentioned the name. I once asked, and he shut the drawer and changed the subject. Poirot turned slowly. So many people close to Sir Miles, and yet so many things left unsaid. Miss Fosbury's gaze darted to the burnt ashes in the grate. He was going to change the will, I'm sure of it. I saw him draft something 2 days ago, but then it disappeared. Disappeared, Poirot echoed, or was made to disappear. As Poirot closed the door behind him, he tapped the wall panel beside the fireplace. Hollow, possibly a hidden compartment. But for now, he would let the suspect stew. He had enough to ask the right questions, and enough to make someone very uncomfortable. The investigation had begun in earnest. The widow remained dry-eyed. But Poirot had found something far more telling than grief. He had found motive. The rain had thinned to a faint mist by early afternoon as Hercule Poirot retired to a modest guest room near the east wing of Hargrave Manor. He did not unpack. Instead, he took out a small leather notebook, flipped it open to a fresh page, and wrote a single word in neat, rounded script. Motive. Then he listed 6 names beneath it. Evelyn, Victor, Jeremy, Fosbury, Renfrew, Fallon. He underlined Evelyn's name twice. Moments later, he descended the wide staircase, shoes making no sound on the Persian runner. He requested that each member of the household meet with him privately in the small conservatory, a glass-paneled room overlooking the rear gardens. The chairs there were uncomfortable, the walls transparent, and the atmosphere disarming. Victor Cray was the first to arrive. He stood stiffly, arms crossed, jacket too tight at the shoulders. His expression tried for composure but fell short by a margin that Poirot measured with precision. "You are managing the estate's financials, monsieur?" "Yes," said Victor. "I've done so since Miles fell ill 2 years ago." "But you do not reside here permanently." "I live in London. I visit on weekends and any time Miles needed me." Poirot leaned back. "And on the night of his death, you were playing billiards with Monsieur Atherton. For how long?" Victor hesitated. "We started around 9, went on until after midnight." "No interruptions?" Victor shook his head. "None that I recall." "Did Sir Miles ever confide in you regarding a change to his will?" Victor blinked. "Not directly, no, but he'd grown more suspicious of people lately, Eveline especially. He mentioned putting safeguards in place." "Safeguards," murmured Poirot. "And if he had changed the will to your disadvantage?" Victor's nostrils flared slightly. "Then I'd accept it. He was always unpredictable. Nothing surprises me anymore." Poirot said nothing. Victor stood, thanked him curtly, and exited with a tight-lipped nod. Jeremy Atherton arrived next, relaxed and chatty, his tone too smooth to be spontaneous. "I suppose you're here to ask me whether I wanted dear Uncle Miles dead. The answer, I'm afraid, is no. I rather like the old curmudgeon." "Curmudgeon, indeed," said Poirot dryly. "Did you know of any plans he had for you? Financially, I mean." "He mentioned, vaguely, that he intended to support a theatre fund I'd set up. But it was never promised." Poirot nodded. "You were with Victor that evening. Did either of you leave the games room at any time?" Jeremy hesitated. He might have stepped out to take a call. I was refilling drinks, maybe 10 minutes, no more. "Ah," Poirot smiled faintly. "A contradiction already. Victor said he remained with you the entire evening." Jeremy raised his eyebrows, then gave a sheepish grin. "Well, we weren't exactly clocking each other's moves." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Even so, it is curious that you cannot both recall the same thing." "Merci, monsieur." Jeremy left with a slight shrug, a lightness that Poirot now interpreted as deliberate deflection. Miss Fosbury was already waiting in the hallway, standing ramrod straight, her notebook tucked under her arm. "Do you keep regular records of Sir Miles's correspondence?" Poirot asked as she entered. "Of course. Dates, recipients, subject lines." "May I see the log for the past week?" She produced a slim brown journal and passed it over. Poirot flipped through the entries until he found the final one, drafted letter to solicitor Trust restructuring, intended to sign in morning. He tapped the entry. "Did you see the final version?" "Number," he asked, not to be disturbed. "It's unusual. Normally I would type and file a copy." "And the name Leo? Does it appear in any correspondence?" Miss Fosbury's jaw tightened. "Number, but I found the photograph years ago behind his dictionary. He never spoke of the boy." "And what of the will?" "I wasn't privy to it, but I do know this. He locked a sealed envelope in the red filing cabinet the day before his death. It was gone the next morning." "Gone?" She nodded. "I opened the drawer myself. Only dust and indentations remained." Poirot took note. A missing key, a missing envelope, a burned fragment of legal language. This was no accident. Next was Dr. Renfrew, who came reluctantly, as if the interview were beneath his role. "I've told the authorities what I know," he said. "The heart gave out. Likely under duress." "And the almond scent." "A trace of cyanide can smell like that," said Renfrew. "But it could also have come from his tonic. I didn't test it." Poirot raised a brow. "Surely you could have done so." Renfrew flushed. "I'm a rural physician, not a chemist. I left it for the coroner." Poirot made a mental note to request an immediate analysis. "And you have known the Hargraves long?" "Decades. I delivered Victor as a child. Evelyn, she's a different story." "Indeed. In what way?" "She never warmed to Waverton society. Always distant. She didn't marry Miles for love, I think." "Then for what?" Renfrew paused. "Stability, control, perhaps escape. She rarely left the house these past months." Poirot thanked him, and the doctor left, brushing past Mrs. Fallon on her way in. The housekeeper clutched her shawl and looked around nervously, as though fearful the walls might overhear. "I've kept this house in order since Miles's first wife died. Lady Evelyn, she was never cruel, but she lived separately from all of us." "You mean emotionally?" Poirot asked. "Emotionally, physically, spiritually. She had no friends, no clubs, only her garden and her books." Poirot folded his hands. "Did Sir Miles ever speak ill of her?" "Number. But sometimes, after arguments, he would lock himself in the study for hours, writing, rewriting. I'd hear the fire crackling. I think he destroyed more than he created." Poirot nodded. "And the key to the study?" "Always on him." "Was the body moved when found?" "No, sir. The butler found him still slumped over, chain broken, key missing, glass empty." "Do you know who poured his tonic?" Mrs. Fallon hesitated. "Lady Evelyn did, always. Miles didn't trust anyone else." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And she poured it the night before his death?" "She did. She brought it in herself. I saw her with the tray. He dismissed her, and she returned 10 minutes later with the empty glass." Poirot sat back. "Merci, madame. You have been most helpful." When the housekeeper left, Poirot sat alone in the conservatory. The drizzle had picked up again, tapping lightly against the glass panes. Contradictions had surfaced. Victor's claim of continuous billiards conflicted with Jeremy's recollection. The envelope Miss Fosbury mentioned had vanished, along with any updated will. Evelyn had served the final drink. The study remained locked to all but one, the widow. And still, not a single tear. Poirot walked slowly back to the study. He tapped the hollow panel beside the fireplace again. This time, he pressed firmly. There was a soft click. A small compartment slid open. Inside, a sealed letter addressed to Leo. No surname, no return address. Poirot slipped it into his pocket and whispered, "The boy who is not spoken of may speak the loudest." As he left the room, Poirot allowed himself one brief look at the grand portrait of Sir Miles above the fireplace. Painted in his prime, hand resting on a globe, eyes full of command. A man who trusted no one, and perhaps in the end, with reason. The next morning, the local authorities returned with increased urgency. The coroner's preliminary report had arrived, and with it came the kind of clarity that causes men to draw swift conclusions. A trace of cyanide had been confirmed in Sir Miles Hargrave's bloodstream. The source was likely the final dose of his nightly tonic, which had been partially absorbed and metabolized before death. The presence was small, but unmistakable. Superintendent Barrington, a large man with a deep voice and a fondness for simple theories, wasted no time. Poison in the glass. Only one person served him that night. Lady Evelyn? That's enough to bring her in. Poirot's expression did not change. He folded his hands and said, "Non, monsieur. It is not enough. It is the beginning, not the end. She had motive, a strained marriage, full control of the estate if he died before changing the will. No witnesses, and she served the drink herself." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. All true, but perhaps too conveniently so. The key was missing from his body. The envelope from the cabinet vanished. Someone else knew there would be no will to contradict their inheritance. And yet the widow remains calm. Too calm. That does not make her guilty, but it makes her interesting. Barrington was not satisfied. He instructed his men to prepare an informal caution and visit Lady Evelyn in her quarters. Poirot did not object. He knew better than to block official procedure. He only watched. The scene that followed was one of quiet tension. Lady Evelyn sat in the drawing-room, still and immaculate. A teacup rested untouched before her. She neither protested nor confessed, merely tilted her head when the officer spoke. "I'm not surprised," she said softly. "Do what you must." Poirot entered just as the officer was preparing to take her statement. "Pardon, madame," he said, "but one more question. The envelope, sealed, addressed to Leo. Did you ever see Sir Miles write it?" She looked at him then. For the first time, her composure flickered. "Leo?" Poirot watched her closely. "Oui. The photograph, the sealed note. You knew of him." Her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the armrest. "He was no one, just a memory. A child Miles used to sponsor, or so he said." Poirot noted the evasiveness. And yet the envelope was hidden, not mailed, and the key vanished. If someone wanted to destroy that note before anyone else saw it, they would have needed access, but not necessarily to poison. "No, madame. The poison is what they want us to chase. The envelope is the truth." Barrington interrupted impatiently. "That's speculation, Poirot. We have a body, a poison, and a serving tray. We need action." Poirot turned to him calmly. "Then act. But know this. The truth, it is not so eager to reveal itself to the impatient." By midday, word had spread through the house that Lady Evelyn might soon be arrested. The staff whispered in corridors. Victor kept to the study, rifling through papers with a nervous energy that betrayed more than concern. Jeremy, flamboyant as ever, appeared in the conservatory with a bottle of sherry and 2 glasses. "To toast the inevitable, Monsieur Poirot?" he said with a grin. "The widow's going to hang." Poirot declined the drink. It is always the quiet ones who are blamed first. "I prefer to reserve my toasts for accuracy, not assumption." Jeremy laughed. "Suit yourself." Between us, though, she had it coming. Nobody mourns a tyrant, and Miles was worse than that. "Did you benefit from his death, monsieur?" Jeremy took a sip and winked. "Only emotionally." Poirot did not smile. Later that day, Poirot requested a second look at the study with Helena Fosbury. "You said a sealed envelope was placed in the red cabinet," he reminded her. Yet there was no key on the body and no signs of forced entry. Helena adjusted her glasses. "Correct." Poirot leaned down beside the cabinet. "But there is a scratch here on the edge of the lock. Fresh. Just enough to suggest a tool was used." Helena frowned. "I hadn't noticed." "Someone opened this without a key," Poirot murmured. "They did not break the lock, but they were in a hurry. A practiced thief might manage such a feat." He stood. "Miss Fosbury, were you ever alone in the study after Sir Miles's death?" She hesitated. I came to retrieve a file. I didn't touch anything else. But if you did see the envelope and it was gone, you must have opened the cabinet." She pursed her lips. "I shouldn't have." "But yes." Poirot offered a slight nod. "Then you are not the thief. You are the witness." Later that evening, Poirot stood outside the billiards room where Victor and Jeremy were once again playing. From the hallway, he listened. Their voices carried just enough. "You think they'll charge her?" Victor asked. Jeremy snorted. "Of course they will. I mean, she did it, or let someone else do it." "You're oddly invested in this," Victor said. "I just don't like loose ends." "She's the cleanest answer." Poirot stepped into the room. "Messieurs, it is always the cleanest answer that stains the shirt." They turned, startled. "I have one request," he continued. "If either of you knows who Leo is, or why Sir Miles considered him his truest legacy, I suggest you speak now." Jeremy blinked. "Leo? Never heard of him." Victor shifted. "A legacy?" "Yes," Poirot said, stepping closer. "Not money, not property. A person, a secret perhaps. Something worth burning papers for, something worth killing for." Victor frowned. If it was so important, why didn't Miles ever mention him? But he did mention him, in letters never sent, in documents never filed, and someone made sure we would not find them. Victor's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Poirot gave a short nod. "That is all for now, but remember, truth has a peculiar way of surviving even the most well-planned murders." That night, Poirot returned to his room. He laid out the facts again in his notebook. Cyanide in the glass, envelope missing, photo of Leo hidden, no will found, and 6 suspects, each with motive, means, or opportunity. But someone had tried, too hard. Poirot closed the book gently. "The convenient suspect is rarely the correct one," he murmured, "and the widow who does not cry may still have nothing to hide." Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a window shutter banged loose. The manor groaned beneath its weight of secrets. Poirot did not sleep. He was waiting for one of them to make a mistake. The morning sun filtered weakly through the clouds, casting pale light over Hargrave Manor's gravel paths and rain-damp hedges. Poirot, immaculate in a grey suit and spotless patent shoes, took his coffee alone in the conservatory. He drank slowly, not for taste but for rhythm, setting the tempo of the day. The manor around him had grown restless. The tension was no longer passive, it was taut and watchful, coiling inward. Poirot was no longer a visitor, he was now a threat. By noon, the detective had planned a subtle game of pressure. It was not confrontation he sought, but reaction. Psychological imbalance. The truth often revealed itself not in what people said, but in how they held themselves when challenged. He began with Jeremy Atherton. He found the godson in the music room, idly playing a minor key progression on the grand piano. Jeremy looked up with his usual grin. "Morning, Poirot. Or should I say, Inspector, I hear you're closing in." Poirot ignored the jest. He walked to the piano and placed a small object beside the keys. A matchbook, gold embossed, from a club in Mayfair. Jeremy stared at it. "What's this?" You left it in the fireplace of Sir Miles's study. You told me you had not entered the room that evening." Jeremy's eyes flicked to the matchbook, then back to Poirot. "It must have been from a previous visit." "No, the matches are dated. A recent batch, only available in the last fortnight." Jeremy gave a soft laugh. "Are you suggesting I lit the fire, poisoned the drink? I play billiards, Poirot. I don't play murderer." Poirot sat in the chair opposite him. "I do not suggest anything. I observe. But there is something in your nature, monsieur, something theatrical. And yet you lack the composure of a performer. Your alibi with Victor, cracked under the pressure of a single question. Your interest in Lady Evelyn's arrest, almost celebratory." Jeremy's smile wavered. "I don't like her, that's all. I'm not the only one." Poirot stood. "Perhaps not. But unlike the others, you pretend too well. That makes you dangerous. Not as a killer, yet, but as someone who would gladly take advantage of one." He left Jeremy silent, hands still on the piano keys. Next, Poirot turned to Victor Cray. He invited him to the study, Sir Miles's study, and instructed the constable to lock the door behind them. The room remained untouched since the death, preserved for investigation. Poirot gestured to the desk. "Sit, Monsieur Cray." Victor looked wary but obeyed. "Now," Poirot continued, "imagine you are your uncle. What would be the first thing you'd do if you sensed betrayal?" Victor frowned. "Secure my assets." "Exactly. And if you suspected your will was at risk of being stolen or destroyed?" "I'd hide it." Poirot nodded and opened the drawer closest to Victor's hand. "You searched this drawer the morning after the death. You rifled through it with speed." Victor flinched. "I was looking for a statement, something to inform the solicitor." "You were looking for confirmation," Poirot said calmly, "that you were still the heir." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You think I killed him?" "I think," Poirot said quietly. "You had reason to panic. Your uncle was changing the will. The envelope containing that change vanished. You are a financial man. You understand percentages, power of attorney, and timelines. If that change was never enacted officially, you retained everything." Victor stood abruptly. "I didn't kill him." Poirot didn't move. "But you lied." Victor's jaw clenched. "Yes, I lied. I left the billiards room for 15 minutes. I walked past the study. I saw Evelyn come out with the tray. That's it. Why did you not tell me before?" "Because you'd think I should have stopped her, or that I was lying to protect myself." "Merci," said Poirot. "That will be all. For now." As Victor left, Poirot made a note in his mind. He is protecting someone, but not himself. The final visit of the day was to Lady Evelyn. He found her in the garden, among dead leaves and overgrown hedges. She wore no coat, only a grey shawl, and carried pruning shears in one hand, though she did not use them. "You should not be out without a coat, madame," Poirot said gently. "Cold is preferable to conversation," she replied, not turning. Poirot stepped beside her. "You once told me that Sir Miles kept secrets, that he burned more than he wrote." "He was a man who wanted control," she said, "but only over the living." Poirot watched her expression, still unreadable, but her hands, delicate, cold, were trembling faintly. "I found the letter to Leo." She looked at him sharply, then turned away. "He called the boy his truest legacy." Poirot continued, "You say Leo was a memory, but you're wrong. He was the threat, a child from the past, a truth that could disrupt the entire estate. If Miles had legitimized him in a new will—" Eveline closed her eyes. Poirot pressed gently. "Who is Leo?" "My son." Poirot stood still. She spoke quietly. "Not by Miles. He was born before I met him. Miles knew. He never acknowledged him publicly, but promised to support him. I kept Leo hidden for his sake. But lately, Miles had grown paranoid. He wanted to erase Leo, to undo everything. I begged him not to. Poirot asked, "Did you poison him?" "No." She met his eyes. "I wanted to, for a moment, but I didn't." Poirot studied her. "You served him the drink?" "I always did. But that night I tasted it before I left the study." He raised an eyebrow. "Tasted it?" She nodded. "It's something I did when things were tense. Miles was obsessed with betrayal. I used to sip the tonic before giving it to him, to show it was safe." That night was no different. Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Then someone added the poison afterward. Or before. But not me." Poirot believed her. Not because she wept. She didn't. Not because she looked innocent. She didn't. But because her voice trembled only when she mentioned her son. The one thing she had left to protect. Poirot returned to his guest room and sat at his writing desk. The lines were forming, the strands slowly pulling together. One truth now stood out. The poison was meant to be blamed on Eveline. The will was stolen to preserve a fortune. And Leo, hidden, erased, was the motive for both. Now all Poirot needed was the moment when guilt would show its face, uninvited. And it was coming. The atmosphere at Hargrave Manor, once quietly tense, now bristled with panic held just beneath the surface. Rumors circulated among the servants about the mysterious Leo, the missing will, the poison, the locked cabinet. The constable stationed at the house reported that Victor had been making repeated phone calls in hushed tones while Jeremy had begun packing his bags, claiming the performance had run its course. Poirot said nothing of what he had learned so far, but he watched. Every step, every glance, every silence. At precisely 7:15 that evening, the manor was jolted again. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fallon, burst into the drawing-room, face pale and voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, the secretary, Miss Fosbury. She's collapsed in the east hallway. I think she's... Please come." Poirot followed immediately, calling for the constable. They found Miss Fosbury crumpled near the foot of the narrow stairwell that led to the attic storage. A small pool of blood had formed beneath her head. Her spectacles were cracked nearby, and her notepad, torn at the top, lay open on the floor. She was unconscious, breathing shallowly. Dr. Renfrew, summoned from the nearby village, arrived 20 minutes later and examined her with professional haste. Head trauma, not deep enough for a fracture, but bad enough. Someone struck her from behind. Could have been pushed or hit. She may not remember anything when she wakes. If she wakes. Poirot stood quietly, hands in his pockets, his face grave. The constable, meanwhile, recovered a few important clues. A rubber-handled torch with traces of red fabric caught in its rim and a torn piece of envelope clutched in Fosbury's hand. Poirot took the scrap gently. On it, barely legible, were the final letters. "Oh, Leo. Miles." She had found something, or someone believed she had. Poirot stepped into the hallway, scanning the surroundings. It was too narrow for accidental falls. The banister was untouched. No loose carpeting, no poor lighting. This was not an accident. Back in the drawing room, Poirot laid out the notepad. The top page had been torn violently, but the impression from her pen was faintly visible on the next page. He held it up to the light and read slowly, "Spoke to Fallon. She remembers Leo arriving once. Sirs M said it was the only mistake he could never erase." Poirot turned to Mrs. Fallon. "Is this true, madame? Did you ever see the boy?" Mrs. Fallon looked as if she might faint herself. "Years ago, a small boy with curly hair. Lady Eveline said he was the gardener's cousin. Sir Miles watched him all day from the study. He didn't speak a word to the boy, just watched. Then that evening I overheard him say to Dr. Renfrew, I made one mistake, and he has a face. I didn't understand it at the time. Merci, Poirot said quietly. You understood it now, yes? She nodded, eyes filling with dread. Poirot knew this was the fulcrum, the moment the case tipped. Someone had tried to silence Fosbury. She was not a threat physically, but intellectually. Her knowledge of the estate's records, her loyalty to truth, and now her discovery of Leo's significance. She was growing too close. And someone had panicked. Poirot requested that no one leave the house for the next 48 hours. The constable supported the request. The suspects were growing more agitated by the hour. Jeremy, now stripped of his flamboyance, approached Poirot in the library with uncharacteristic solemnity. I didn't touch the secretary. Whatever's happening here, it's too much. Miles was mad, yes, but this is murder on top of murder. Perhaps, Poirot said. Or perhaps it is murder unfinished. Jeremy hesitated. You think whoever killed Miles came back to finish their work? Poirot's eyes held his, or never left. Upstairs, Lady Eveline had locked herself in her suite. She refused meals and declined all questions. Poirot did not disturb her. He believed her retreat was not guilt, but grief. A different grief than most understood. A grief over something she had never been allowed to claim. Her son. Her right to be a mother. Her dignity. Victor, by contrast, became increasingly irritable. He stormed into the study, slammed drawers, demanded updates from the constable, and even confronted Poirot. Why are we still circling the same questions? You think I struck Miss Fosbury, poisoned my own uncle? You're wasting time. Poirot, undisturbed, replied, If I thought you were the killer, monsieur, I would not be circling. I would be closing in. Victor's mouth opened, but he said nothing. Poirot retired to the conservatory that evening, deep in thought. He reopened the sealed letter he had discovered behind the fireplace. It had no formal structure, just a few lines, scrawled in hurried handwriting. Leo must never know. The truth would destroy the house. He is not to return. The money will remain, but the name must end with me. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. Poirot whispered aloud, and someone else read this too, someone who wanted the money, but also someone who wanted to erase the threat. That was the second murder. Interrupted. Fosbury had found the thread and was nearly killed for it, but that act had exposed the desperation. The real murderer was slipping. Poirot instructed the constable to search the attic and surrounding areas. Behind a loose panel, hidden in a box marked Accounts 1983, they found the original updated will. The envelope had been opened, but the document inside was intact, unsigned but dated and written in Sir Miles's hand. Leo Hargrave to be designated primary beneficiary of the trust, in absence of signature, held for review pending solicitor verification. The document was proof of intent, enough to establish motive, and enough to corner the one person who had the most to lose. The trap had been set. Poirot now only needed to wait. He sent word that he would hold a formal gathering of all parties in the drawing room the following afternoon. Everyone was expected to attend. He made no mention of the letter, nor of the will, nor of the torch with red fibers. These were no longer pieces of the puzzle, they were bait. That night, Poirot placed the envelope in a glass case on the mantelpiece of the study and left the door ajar. Then he waited in the dark. And someone came. The drawing room was unusually still the next afternoon. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth unable to shake the cold unease that had settled in the manor. Poirot had invited everyone to gather: Victor, Jeremy, Lady Eveline, Miss Fosbury, who had been revived but still appeared pale and weary, and Dr. Renfrew. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fallon, stood off to the side, eyes downcast. All were in attendance, but none were at ease. tension hummed beneath every glance, every word exchanged. Poirot entered the room, precisely 2 p.m., the precise tick of the clock accompanying him as he took his place in front of the fire. He adjusted his cuffs, glanced at the group, and then addressed them. "I've gathered you here for one reason, to bring clarity. Not to assign blame prematurely, but to unearth the truth. The truth, mes amis, is often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone who is willing to look." He let the silence linger, watching the faces before him. Lady Evelyn, still dignified but tired, avoided his gaze. Victor sat stiffly, his hands clenched in his lap. Jeremy looked bored, but his foot tapped nervously under the chair. Miss Fosbury, still recovering from the blow to her head, clutched a handkerchief in her hands, twisting it with quiet anxiety. Dr. Renfrew was the only one who seemed calm, as if he had already resigned himself to the inevitable. Poirot cleared his throat and gestured for them to remain seated. "First, let us examine what we know. Sir Miles Hargrave died from poisoning. A small but effective dose of cyanide was introduced into his tonic. This, however, was not the first clue." He paused for effect. "No, the first clue was the missing will, a will that, for reasons unknown to us, had not been signed but was, nevertheless, a powerful document. Sir Miles intended to name someone else, the true heir, the one he saw as his truest legacy. That person, I believe, was Leo Hargrave, the son from a previous relationship, the one Sir Miles kept hidden." He turned and placed a folded sheet of paper on the table before them. It was a copy of the document he had discovered the previous night in the attic. The words were carefully inscribed, but the absence of the signature was glaring. "This will," Poirot continued, "was written but never executed. Yet it speaks volumes about Sir Miles's intentions. He wanted Leo to inherit everything, but someone who stood to lose everything, could not allow that to happen." He let the words sink in. The room grew heavier, the weight of his accusations pressing down on each person's conscience. "Lady Evelyn, I believe you were the only one who could have prevented the execution of that will. You were his wife, but you were also a mother, and you knew that your past would come to haunt you. Perhaps you thought the boy, Leo, would bring ruin to your carefully constructed life here at Hargrave Manor. And perhaps, when you saw the will, you saw an opportunity to erase him, once and for all." Lady Evelyn stiffened in her chair. "You are wrong," she said, her voice steady but tinged with the smallest tremor. "I would never harm my own son. I would never—" Poirot held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "Madame, I did not say you poisoned your husband. What I did say is that you stood to gain everything if Sir Miles remained alive, and everything if he died, if Leo was erased from the equation." The room grew colder as Poirot's gaze shifted from Lady Evelyn to the others. "You all had a reason to silence Sir Miles. Victor, you were poised to inherit the estate. Jeremy, your future was tied to Miles's fortune, to the theatre project you so desperately wanted. Miss Fosbury, you were a confidant to Sir Miles's secrets. And Dr. Renfrew, you knew more than you let on about Sir Miles's health. You were his physician, and you saw him dying before anyone else did. You were the only one with the means to make his death appear natural." Miss Fosbury's eyes widened. "What do you mean by that? I had no reason to harm Sir Miles." Poirot turned toward her. "You knew that Leo existed, didn't you? Sir Miles's one secret, kept from everyone, even you. You saw the letters, you saw the drafts. You knew he planned to name Leo as his successor. When you realized that Miles's death would not be the clean slate you hoped for, you acted." Fosbury's face turned pale. I didn't do it. I didn't know he would do that." Poirot stood tall. "Ah, but you were the one who found the missing will. You knew about Leo, and you knew the danger it posed. Sir Miles's final words, his unfinished letter. His mind was already being poisoned by his own paranoia. But it was too late. The boy had to be erased. Lady Evelyn stood abruptly. Enough. Miles was paranoid, yes, but I loved him. And Leo, I never meant for it to end like this. I never meant for it to come to this. Poirot gave her a soft, measured smile. But it did come to this, madame. And that is where my investigation began. At the moment of your husband's death. It was not just the poisoning. It was the theft of the will, the destruction of the future. There was a shift in the room, a subtle crack in the facade. Poirot turned back to Miss Fosbury. You were clever, madame. But your panic when you found the letter and the attempt on your life, it was not only about keeping Leo's legacy hidden. It was about controlling the future that Leo represented. And I believe you, Miss Fosbury, were willing to go to any lengths to stop him from claiming it. A pause, a long, suffocating silence. Poirot moved to the mantelpiece and touched the glass case, the one that contained the sealed envelope. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The truth was right here. All the while you were so busy focusing on the poison, the suspicion, that you never saw the real threat. Leo, Miles's hidden legacy. Suddenly, Mrs. Fallon stepped forward, a look of recognition crossing her face. But it's Leo, isn't it? Leo who is the real heir. He's the one who was kept hidden, the one who would have taken everything. He's the one Miles tried to protect, and he's the one you all feared. Poirot nodded. Leo is the key, but the person who really killed Miles was someone who couldn't let go of the past, someone who couldn't bear the thought of losing control, of losing everything. Poirot's eyes scanned the room. Each face was drawn, pale, as realization slowly dawned on them. The murderer, the mastermind, had hidden in plain sight. He looked at the group one last time, and without any further words, he spoke with quiet precision. The one who could not bear Miles's plan for Leo, the one who destroyed the will, was not Lady Evelyn, not Miss Fosbury, not even Victor. The real murderer is someone else in this room. And that person is you, Doctor. Renfrew. Dr. Renfrew froze, his face suddenly drained of color. What do you mean? I didn't do anything. Poirot's voice grew colder. You knew Leo. You knew about Miles's past, his sins. You knew the truth about the boy, and you couldn't let him take everything. You knew that poisoning Miles would be the perfect way to destroy the evidence, to wipe away the threat. And when Leo came back for his inheritance, you made sure he wouldn't succeed. The room was silent as Dr. Renfrew's breath hitched. His trembling hands betrayed him. Poirot stepped forward, his words cutting through the stillness. Dr. Renfrew, you poisoned Sir Miles and planned to frame the others, but in the end, you overlooked one thing. The truth always finds its way to the surface, even if it has to be dragged out. Renfrew's face fell, his shoulders slumping as the weight of Poirot's words sank in. It was over. The house had grown eerily quiet after Poirot's revelation. The weight of truth hung heavy in the air, suffocating the usual sounds of the manor. The fire crackled softly in the drawing room, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but the people gathered there were no longer concerned with warmth or comfort. They were frozen, trapped in the grip of Poirot's words. Dr. Renfrew stood stiffly, his face pale and devoid of its usual composure. He could no longer maintain the pretense. Poirot had laid bare his motives, his actions, his guilt, and Renfrew knew that no argument, no denial could escape the trap the Belgian detective had set. His shaking hands reached for the chair behind him, but he was too slow to sit. Instead, he remained standing, his shoulders hunched, his face betraying the dawning realization that the game had ended. Poirot remained seated, his fingers steepled in front of him, watching Dr. Renfrew with an unwavering calm. There was no gloating in his expression, no triumph in his tone, just quiet certainty. You knew, Doctor Renfrew, Poirot said softly, breaking the silence. You knew that Sir Miles Hargrave was planning to change his will. You knew that Leo, his son, the one Sir Miles had kept hidden, was the true heir. And you knew that if Leo were to inherit, everything you had worked for, everything you had gained from Sir Miles's trust, would be gone. Renfrew swallowed hard, his throat dry. He took a hesitant step toward the chair, then paused, looking at Poirot with haunted eyes. "You don't understand, Poirot. Miles was obsessed. He wouldn't let me help him. He was losing his mind. And when he told me about Leo, when he admitted that his past was coming back to claim him, I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let that boy take everything. He wasn't even part of this family. He was a stranger." Poirot's gaze never wavered. "And so you decided to take matters into your own hands. You poisoned Sir Miles. You made it appear natural, an illness, a breakdown, so that no one would suspect foul play. You killed him because you feared what Leo's return would do to your comfortable life here." Renfrew clenched his fists. "I didn't kill him. I didn't mean to. I thought I could stop it. Just stop Leo from getting that will. I didn't mean for it to get out of control. I wanted to protect what I had here. My position. My future." Poirot's voice was firm, but not unkind. "And so, you destroyed the will. You took it, and you thought you could erase all evidence of Leo's existence. But what you failed to realize, Doctor, Renfrew, is that Leo's claim was not just about money. It was about truth. And truth, like a seed, will always find a way to grow, no matter how deeply you bury it." Renfrew collapsed into the chair, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I thought I could get away with it. I thought if I erased Leo, if I silenced the truth, everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. And now, everything is ruined." Poirot's eyes softened for a moment. "No one wins in such a game, monsieur. But you played it anyway, and now you must face the consequences." The room was silent again, save for the crackling of the fire and the occasional sound of distant footsteps echoing in the corridors. Poirot sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Dr. Renfrew's hunched form. The others in the room, their faces unreadable, their thoughts their own, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Lady Eveline, who had remained quiet through it all, now spoke. Her voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "I knew he had something to do with it. I knew he was hiding something, but I never suspected this. I didn't even think it was possible." Poirot turned to her, his gaze still gentle. "Madame, Dr. Renfrew had his reasons. Selfish reasons, of course, but reasons nonetheless. And as with all things driven by fear and selfishness, those reasons led him to commit murder." Lady Eveline looked down at the floor, her fingers trembling in her lap. "Leo, I never wanted him to return. I thought I could protect my family, my life, from the past. But I never wanted Miles to die. I never wanted this." Poirot nodded. "No one ever truly desires the consequences of their actions, madam. But sometimes we push events along without realizing the cost until it is too late." The room fell into a deep, contemplative silence, each person grappling with the weight of what had just been revealed. Dr. Renfrew had been the catalyst, the one who had pulled the strings that led to Miles's death. But the ripples of that action had affected everyone in the room. Lady Eveline, caught between her love for Miles and the fear of her past coming to light. Victor, whose desperation for control had blinded him to the truth. Jeremy, who had seen the unraveling of the Hargrave family as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. Poirot stood up, his sharp eyes taking in the group as a whole. "It is time for justice to take its course. You will all be questioned by the authorities, and Dr. Renfrew will face the full extent of the law for his crimes. But I must also leave you with this reminder. In the end, no one can escape the consequences of their choices. The truth always emerges, and those who seek to bury it will find themselves buried beneath it." The constable entered the room then, a solemn figure with a clipboard in his hands. "Doctor, "Renfrew," he said, his voice steady but firm, "you are under arrest for the murder of Sir Miles Hargrave. You have the right to remain silent." Dr. Renfrew's face crumpled, his eyes dull with the weight of his actions. He didn't resist as the constable handcuffed him, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he was led away, Poirot turned to the remaining guests in the room. "The investigation is over," he said quietly. "But remember, this was not about Leo's inheritance. It was about fear, fear of the past, fear of the truth, and in the end, it was that fear that led to the destruction of all that was built." Lady Evelyn, her eyes still hollow, stood and walked toward the window. "What happens now, Poirot? What happens to me?" Poirot regarded her for a moment, his voice soft but unyielding. "What happens to you, madame, is the life you choose to rebuild. You may have lost everything, but there is still a future for you, one that is not built on secrets." As he turned to leave, Poirot paused by the door and looked back at the room, his gaze lingering on the cold hearth where the fire had once burned bright. "And remember this, madame, it is not the past that defines us, it is the choices we make in the present." With that, Poirot left the room, his footsteps echoing in the now silent manor. Outside, the rain had stopped, the sky was clear, and the evening stars were beginning to pierce the velvet darkness. Poirot walked toward the gate, his mind already turning over the next case, the next puzzle, the next mystery. And so, once again, the detective moved on, leaving behind the ruins of another tangled story, another tragedy resolved by the quiet logic of his little grey cells. The days following Dr. Renfrew's arrest were a blur of paperwork, interviews, and the steady hum of justice unfolding. Hargrave Manor, once vibrant with the movement of its inhabitants, now felt like a mausoleum, heavy with the weight of its secrets. The authorities conducted their thorough investigation, and Dr. Renfrew was taken into custody without a struggle. His trial was swift, the evidence clear, and the charges unambiguous. There was little left to dispute. Renfrew's motives, his self-serving desperation, his fear of being replaced, and his fixation on preserving his position had led him down the dark path of murder. Lady Evelyn remained in the manor, her once elegant, composed demeanor now worn with the passing days. She declined interviews, retreated from public life, and spent most of her time in the garden, where she would wander among the roses and lilies, her face as unreadable as the stone statues that lined the paths. She had lost everything, her husband, her dignity, the life she had worked so hard to build. But there was no crying, no visible grief. It was as if the capacity for emotional release had simply been drained from her. Poirot, ever observant, had taken note of her behavior. In his years of solving cases, he had seen many different kinds of grief, but this was different. There was a hollowness to Lady Evelyn's sorrow, a detachment that spoke not of a woman mourning a loved one, but of someone grappling with the irrevocable loss of control over their own life. He made one final visit to the manor before departing, intending to offer Lady Evelyn a parting word of counsel. He had no illusions about fixing what was broken, but perhaps he could offer her something, a way forward, even if only a small one. Lady Evelyn was in the library when he arrived. She looked up from a book she was not reading, her eyes dull from sleepless nights, her face pale in the dim light of the afternoon. The fire crackled in the hearth, but there was no warmth to it, not the kind that could heal. Poirot seated himself across from her, his eyes scanning the room briefly. The library had always been Sir Miles's domain, his refuge from the world. Now it seemed almost suffocating, a reminder of everything lost. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice soft but carrying the weight of experience. "The house is silent now. The truth has been laid bare, and the one responsible for Miles's death has been held accountable. But there is more to this than the murder. There is a life to be lived afterward." Lady Evelyn's lips pressed together, and she looked away for a moment, as if considering his words. Then, slowly, She spoke. "Do you think I could go on? After everything, after all I've done?" Poirot's gaze softened. "I do not judge you, madame. You made your choices, as we all do, but the choices you make from this moment forward are yours alone. The past, it will never leave you, but it need not define you." She laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Define me? It has already done so. I lost Miles, I lost Leo, I lost my life. And now, I have nothing left." Poirot took a breath, carefully choosing his next words. "Perhaps, madame, you are mistaken. You have not lost everything. You have your life. And that life, however difficult, can still be a journey towards something else. What that something is, I cannot say, but you must decide. To remain here, trapped in the past, is to remain buried beneath the weight of it. But to move forward, to begin again, that is your choice." Lady Evelyn looked at him then, really looked at him, as though seeing him for the first time. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of sorrow and something else. Perhaps hope, or at least the faintest glimmer of it. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been afraid of what comes next. Afraid of facing what I've done, what I've lost." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but encouraging. "Fear is natural, madame, but you cannot let it control you. It is the future you must look toward now. The past, it is already gone." She nodded slowly, as if the weight of his words were beginning to sink in. "And Leo?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Poirot's expression softened, and for a moment he allowed himself a small, empathetic smile. "Leo is part of your past, yes. But you cannot change what has been. You can, however, choose how you remember him." Her hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them together in her lap. "I never wanted to hurt him. I never wanted him to be erased from my life. But I couldn't live with the shame. I couldn't let him ruin everything I'd worked for." Poirot nodded. "The past has a way of haunting us, madame, but it need not dictate our future. You must find peace with it, or it will consume you." Lady Evelyn sat in silence for a long while, staring into the flickering fire. Poirot said nothing, giving her space to think, to breathe. After a time, she spoke again. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" "Yes, madame," Poirot replied. "My work here is done. Justice has been served, and now I must move on to the next case." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens, where the flowers had begun to bloom again despite the heavy rain of the past days. The world, it seemed, was still turning, indifferent to the tragedies that had unfolded within the walls of Hargrave Manor. "You have helped me," she said quietly. "More than you know. Perhaps someday I will find a way to start again." Poirot rose from his seat and approached her, his voice soft. "I have no doubt that you will, madame. The road ahead may be difficult, but it is yours to walk. Choose it wisely." She looked at him one last time, her eyes searching his face for something, perhaps understanding, perhaps forgiveness. Poirot did not offer either, for it was not his place to give. He simply gave her what he could, his quiet confidence that she could find her way forward. As he walked to the door, he turned back to her. "Remember, madam, your past does not define you. Your choices from this moment onward will." And with that, Poirot left the room. The investigation into Sir Miles's death had been concluded. Dr. Renfrew had been sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Sir Miles Hargrave, and the estate was slowly being divided according to the legal will, with Leo's claim acknowledged posthumously. The rest of the family, Lady Evelyn included, were left to rebuild their lives from the shattered remnants of their once pristine world. Poirot, having seen the outcome of his work, boarded the train back to London, his mind already turning to the next mystery, the next puzzle. But as the train rumbled away from Hargrave Manor, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The truth in this case had come at a high cost, but it had come nonetheless. And sometimes that was all one could ask for. The journey back to London was a quiet one. The train moved steadily along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter a perfect backdrop to Poirot's own thoughts, which were now turning inward. The resolution of the Hargrave case had been as satisfying as any detective might hope for, but Poirot had always known that the satisfaction of solving a case was not always synonymous with peace. Justice had been served, and yet there was an emptiness that remained, a hollow space that no amount of reasoning or deductive skill could fill. He sat alone in his compartment, his mind replaying the scenes from Hargrave Manor, the moments of revelation, the flicker of truth emerging from beneath layers of deceit. There was no joy in victory, no sense of triumph to be had when the stakes were so high, when the players were so entwined in their own fears and flaws. It was not the first time Poirot had encountered the weight of human error, but it was one of the cases where the consequences felt particularly heavy. Lady Eveline's final words echoed in his mind. "Perhaps, someday, I will find a way to start again." The detective's gaze softened as he glanced out of the window at the passing countryside, the lush green fields now fading into the grey expanse of London's outskirts. She would indeed need time, but Poirot could not help but feel a twinge of empathy for her. In a life where choices were often shaped by the fear of what could be lost, the weight of the past could be suffocating. But even for those who had made grave mistakes, there remained a path forward, if they chose to seek it. In the silence of the train car, Poirot reflected on the people he had encountered over the course of the investigation. Dr. Renfrew, whose desperation had driven him to murder. Jeremy Atherton, whose charm masked a fear of losing everything, and Victor Cray, whose ambition had blurred the lines between loyalty and greed. Each of them, in their own way, had sought to control the future, to ensure their place in a world that seemed so uncertain. But in their actions, they had all revealed the same truth. Fear, when unchecked, often leads to destruction. Poirot knew well the dangers of fear. He had seen it in countless cases where the desire to preserve oneself had led to betrayal, deception, and ultimately, ruin. But there was another force at play in every case he solved. Reason. Reason, as cold and precise as the ticking of a clock, could cut through the haze of emotion and paranoia, revealing the truth in all its painful clarity. Reason had served Poirot well throughout his career. And yet, as he sat in his compartment, contemplating the events of the past few weeks, he realized that perhaps it was not just logic that had brought him to his conclusions. There was something else, something more subtle, more human, that had guided him. It was empathy. Empathy had allowed him to see past the surface, to understand the motivations that lay beneath the facades. Empathy had given him the ability to observe, not just the facts of a case, but the emotions that fueled the actions of the people involved. It was empathy that had led him to understand Lady Eveline's grief, even when she refused to show it. It was empathy that had allowed him to piece together the puzzle of Dr. Renfrew's past, even when Renfrew had tried so hard to hide it. Empathy, Poirot realized, was what made him different from others. It was not just about solving the crime. It was about understanding the people behind the crime. It was about seeing them not as criminals, but as flawed individuals, each struggling with their own burdens, their own fears. As the train neared London, Poirot felt a sense of resolution settle over him. The Hargrave case had been difficult, but it had been another chapter in the long, complex story of human nature. It had reaffirmed what he had known for years, that even in the darkest of circumstances, the truth could be uncovered if only one had the patience to observe and the courage to face it. The train finally pulled into the station, its wheels grinding to a halt with a finality that echoed in Poirot's chest. He stood up, straightening his coat, and walked off the platform with his usual quiet confidence. The bustle of London welcomed him, the noise of the crowd, the rush of life moving on in its ceaseless, chaotic rhythm. Poirot moved through it all with ease, as if the city were a puzzle waiting to be solved, each face a clue, each step a calculated decision. He made his way to his modest flat, a place that had always served as a sanctuary from the world's noise. Inside, he set down his hat and coat, then took a seat by the fireplace. He poured himself a glass of sherry, the warmth of the drink a small comfort as he settled into his chair. As he sipped the drink, Poirot thought once more about the case, about the people he had encountered and the truths he had uncovered. He thought about Lady Evelyn and the difficult journey that lay ahead of her. He thought about Leo, the boy who had never had the chance to claim his rightful place. And he thought about Dr. Renfrew, whose fear had led him to destroy so much. Poirot set the glass down and leaned back in his chair. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth wrapping around him like a blanket. For the first time in a long while, Poirot allowed himself a small, private smile. His work was done, but the questions it raised would remain with him. The human heart, with all its contradictions, its flaws, and its capacity for both good and evil, was a mystery that no detective could ever fully solve. But that was what made it worth investigating, what made it worth understanding. Poirot closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had given his best to the case. He had uncovered the truth, and in doing so, he had brought a sense of justice to a broken world. But he knew that no case would ever be the same. Each one, like the people involved, was unique, shaped by the choices made and the lives lived. As the fire burned down to embers, Poirot stood up and walked over to his desk. He took out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. His pen moved quickly, as if guided by an unseen hand, the words flowing with purpose. "Another case will come," he thought as he wrote, "and I will be ready. For the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it is buried." Poirot finished the sentence, placed the pen down, and stood up once more, looking out the window at the darkening London sky. The mystery of life, like the mysteries he solved, would never truly end. There would always be more to uncover, more to learn, more to understand. And he, Hercule Poirot, would be there to observe, to reason, and to help bring the truth to light. The sun had long since set over London, casting the city in a pale, fading light. Poirot stood in front of his modest fireplace, the flickering flames casting long shadows across his study. The events of Hargrave Manor were now a closed chapter, but the questions and complexities of human nature still lingered in his mind, ever the puzzle to be solved. The case had tested him more than others, perhaps because of the personal stakes involved, the layers of guilt, fear, and ambition that had bound the suspects together. But now, with the facts set in stone and the criminal held accountable, there was only one thing left: resolution. Poirot reflected on the strange, unspoken bond that had existed between him and the Hargraves, how the truth had been forced into the open despite every effort to hide it. It was a reminder, as always, that no matter how carefully a crime is planned, no matter how thoroughly a person tries to bury their sins, the truth will always find a way to emerge. The final chapter of the story was one of calm closure. Dr. Renfrew had been arrested, tried, and sentenced. The investigation into Sir Miles's death had been thorough, and the court of law had made its decision. But justice had come with a cost. The Hargrave estate, once full of life and privilege, was now in the hands of lawyers and accountants, divided and dissected. Lady Evelyn remained in Hargrave Manor, alone with her memories, the weight of the past too heavy to escape. But there was no real victory in this resolution, not for Poirot. No, justice had been served, but the cost had been too high. Too many lives had been broken, too much had been lost. Poirot made one final trip to the manor to check on the aftermath. The grounds, once immaculate and vibrant with the sounds of life, had fallen silent. The windows were shut, the doors locked, and the staff had slowly dispersed, moving on to other places, other families. The only thing left now was the memory of what had happened here, the dark tale of a family caught in the web of their own secrets. Lady Evelyn stood at the edge of the garden, watching the wind stir the flowers in the distance. The once graceful and poised woman now appeared older, wearier, the weight of her choices settling upon her shoulders like a physical burden. She did not turn as Poirot approached, but she spoke softly, her voice low and resigned. "I suppose you've come to offer your final judgment, Poirot, to tell me I'm free to go on with my life." Poirot approached, standing a few paces away from her. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Madame, I have no judgment to offer. You know what you have done, and I know that you will carry the weight of it for the rest of your days. But there is one thing I can say. There is always a way forward. You may not see it now, but it is there, waiting for you." Lady Evelyn glanced at him for a moment, her eyes tired and distant. "A way forward," she repeated, as if the very idea were foreign to her. "What use is a way forward when everything I've ever known is shattered? When my husband is gone and my son, Leo, is a ghost from the past? What is left for me?" Poirot's gaze softened. "Madame, there is no such thing as a life without choice. Your past may haunt you, but it does not have to define you. The decision is yours. The truth has been revealed. Now what you choose to do with it is what matters." She did not respond immediately. Instead, she turned away, her eyes once again returning to the horizon. The silence stretched out, a quiet acknowledgement of the complexity of the situation, of the pain that was beyond words. Finally, Lady Evelyn spoke again, her voice more measured, her tone quieter. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps there is a way forward, but I don't know if I can walk it." Poirot placed his hand gently on his cane, eyes fixed on her. "You may not know, madame, but sometimes the first step is the hardest. You will find your way, I have no doubt." Lady Evelyn gave him a faint, almost imperceptible nod before she turned back toward the house. Poirot stood for a moment longer, watching her retreat into the shadows of the manor, her figure becoming one with the darkness. He had done what he could. He had uncovered the truth, untangled the web of deception, and ensured that justice was served. The rest was in her hands. He turned and made his way toward the car waiting at the entrance of the estate, his mind already moving forward to the next case, the next mystery. The train back to London would be waiting, and Poirot would be there to meet it, always ready for what came next. As he walked across the grounds, his thoughts lingered on the people he had met, each one a reflection of the complexities of human nature. Dr. Renfrew, whose fear had driven him to murder. Lady Evelyn, whose love for her son had been tainted by her fear of losing everything. Victor and Jeremy, who had played their own games of power and ambition. And Leo, the missing link, the one who had never had a chance to be part of this world, whose existence had been erased in an effort to protect the legacy of a family already fraying at the edges. But what struck Poirot most was the realization that, despite everything, there was still a future for each of them. Not a perfect future, not an easy one, but a future nonetheless. The consequences of their actions would follow them, but so too would the opportunities to change, to make different choices. Perhaps that was the true lesson of the case, the understanding that life, for all its twists and turns, was still full of possibility. Poirot reached the car and climbed in, the door shutting behind him with a soft click. The driver started the engine, and as they pulled away from the manor, Poirot glanced out the window at the darkened landscape, the faint glow of London in the distance. The case was closed. But Poirot knew there would always be more mysteries, more people, more truths waiting to be uncovered. And so, as the car rolled steadily toward the heart of London, Poirot allowed himself a final thought, a quiet, unspoken reflection on the lives he had touched and the cases he had solved.